Marcus Thompson had been working as a royal security guard for 15 years when he first encountered the young prince, who would change his life forever. Standing at 6 feet tall with graying temples and weathered hands, Marcus carried himself with the quiet dignity that came from years of service. He had seen 3 generations of royals pass through the palace halls, but nothing had prepared him for his assignment to Prince George's security detail. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Marcus adjusted his earpiece and checked his watch. It was 7:30 and his shift was just beginning. He had requested this particular assignment after hearing whispers among the staff about the young prince's unusual behavior. Other guards had mentioned that the 8-year-old boy was different from his siblings, quieter and more observant than most children his age. Marcus remembered his own childhood growing up in a working-class family in Manchester. His father had been a factory worker and his mother cleaned offices to make ends meet. The idea of serving the royal family had seemed impossible back then, but determination and hard work had brought him to this prestigious position. Yet lately he found himself questioning whether his job truly mattered. The palace corridors echoed with the sound of his polished boots as Marcus made his way to the family wing. He nodded to the other staff members he passed, the housekeepers who had been there since before he started, the kitchen staff preparing breakfast, and the gardeners tending to the pristine grounds visible through the windows. Everyone moved with practiced efficiency, their roles clearly defined in the grand machinery of royal life. When Marcus reached his post outside Prince George's room, he settled into the familiar routine of watching and waiting. The young prince was still sleeping, giving Marcus time to observe the quiet hallway adorned with oil paintings of ancestors and fresh flowers that were replaced daily. He had always wondered what it would be like to grow up in such surroundings, surrounded by history and privilege that most people could only imagine. The sound of small footsteps interrupted his thoughts. Prince George emerged from his room, already dressed in his school uniform. The boy's sandy hair was neatly combed, and his blue eyes held an intelligence that seemed beyond his years. What struck Marcus most was how the prince moved, not with the careless energy typical of children, but with a careful consideration of his surroundings and the people in them. "Good morning, Marcus," Prince George said softly, his voice carrying the polite formality he had been taught since he could speak. But there was something else in his tone, a genuine warmth that surprised the seasoned guard. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Marcus replied, falling into step behind the young prince as they made their way toward the breakfast room. This was the beginning of what Marcus thought would be just another routine assignment, but he could not have been more wrong. As they walked through the palace halls, Marcus noticed how Prince George acknowledged every staff member they encountered. The boy would nod respectfully to the cleaning lady polishing the banister, smile at the chef's assistant carrying fresh pastries, and even pause to pet the palace cat that had wandered into their path. These weren't forced gestures taught by protocol instructors. They seemed to come naturally to the young prince. During breakfast, Marcus positioned himself discreetly near the dining room entrance, close enough to ensure security, but far enough to allow the family privacy. Through the partially open door, he could hear the gentle conversation between Prince George and his parents. The boy spoke thoughtfully about his upcoming school day, asking questions about current events that showed a remarkable awareness of the world beyond palace walls. After breakfast, as they prepared to leave for school, Prince George did something that caught Marcus completely off guard. The young prince approached him directly, looked up with those serious blue eyes and asked, "Marcus, have you had breakfast today?" The question was asked with such genuine concern that Marcus felt a flutter of surprise in his chest. "Yes, Your Royal Highness." "Thank you for asking," Marcus replied, though in truth, he had only grabbed a quick cup of coffee before starting his shift. The prince seemed to study his face for a moment, as if trying to determine whether Marcus was being completely honest. The drive to school was uneventful, but Marcus found himself thinking about the brief exchange. In all his years of service, no member of the royal family had ever asked about his personal well-being. It was a small gesture, but it planted a seed of something Marcus couldn't quite identify at the time. When they returned to the palace that afternoon, Marcus witnessed another moment that would stay with him. Prince George noticed that one of the younger staff members, a new kitchen assistant who couldn't have been more than 18, looked upset. Without being prompted by anyone, The prince approached the young man and asked if he was all right. The assistant, clearly nervous about speaking to royalty, mumbled something about missing his family back home. Prince George listened intently, then disappeared for a few minutes before returning with a small package of biscuits from the kitchen. "These always make me feel better when I'm homesick," he told the assistant with a shy smile. The young man's face lit up with gratitude, and Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of the boy he was meant to protect. As the day ended and Marcus prepared to hand over his duties to the night shift, he realized that something fundamental had changed in his perspective. For years he had viewed his job as simply another form of employment, respectable work that paid well and provided security for his own family. But watching Prince George throughout the day had reminded him of something he had forgotten: the power of simple human kindness and the responsibility that comes with privilege. Walking home through the London streets that evening, Marcus found himself thinking about his own 8-year-old daughter, Emma. He wondered if he had been teaching her the same values that seemed to come so naturally to Prince George. The young prince's actions had been small and seemingly insignificant, but they had revealed a character that spoke to something deeper than royal protocol or public expectations. That night, as Marcus tucked Emma into bed, he asked her about her day and really listened to her answers. He realized that somewhere along the way, in his focus on providing for his family, he had forgotten the importance of truly being present with them. Prince George's simple question about breakfast had opened a door in Marcus's mind that he hadn't even realized was closed. As he settled into his own bed, Marcus reflected on the unexpected impact of his first day with Prince George. He had expected to be protecting the young prince, but instead, it seemed that the boy had begun to change something fundamental in Marcus himself. Tomorrow would bring new interactions, new moments of observation, and Marcus found himself genuinely curious about what he might learn from the remarkable young person he had been assigned to guard. The second week of Marcus's assignment brought an incident that would forever change how he viewed both his role and the young prince he protected. It was a rainy Thursday morning when Prince George's usual routine was interrupted by an unexpected visitor to the palace. Marcus had been briefing the morning shift about security protocols when he noticed unusual activity near the service entrance. Through the rain-streaked windows, Marcus spotted an elderly woman standing uncertainly by the staff gate. She was poorly dressed, with a worn coat that had seen better days and shoes that were clearly letting in water. The gate guards were politely but firmly explaining that she couldn't enter the premises without proper authorization. Marcus could see the woman's shoulders sagging with disappointment as she turned to leave. Prince George had finished his morning lessons early and was walking with Marcus toward the library when he too noticed the commotion outside. The young prince stopped abruptly, pressing his face to the window to get a better look. Marcus watched as the boy's expression grew concerned, his eyebrows furrowing in the way they did when he was thinking deeply about something. "Marcus, who is that lady?" Prince George asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "She looks sad." Marcus glanced outside again, noting how the woman was now walking slowly down the street, her head bowed against the rain. "I'm not sure, Your Royal Highness. Sometimes people come hoping to meet the royal family, but there are proper channels for such requests." The prince was quiet for a long moment, his small hand pressed against the cold glass. "She's walking in the rain without an umbrella," he observed, "and her shoes look like they have holes in them." Before Marcus could respond, Prince George had made a decision that would demonstrate the depth of his character. The young prince turned and walked quickly toward the service area where the kitchen staff worked. Marcus followed, curious about what the boy intended to do. The prince approached the head cook, Mrs. Patterson, who had been working at the palace for over 20 years. "Mrs. Patterson," Prince George said politely, "could you help me prepare a care package? There's a lady outside who looks like she might be hungry and cold." Mrs. Patterson looked surprised but pleased by the request. "Of course, Your Royal Highness. What would you like to include?" Marcus watched in amazement as Prince George carefully selected items: fresh sandwiches, warm soup in a thermos, hot tea, and some of the kitchen's famous biscuits. The boy also asked for a warm blanket from the staff supplies and insisted on including a handwritten note. Marcus observed the prince writing carefully, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration as he formed each letter. "What are you writing?" Marcus asked gently. I'm telling her that she matters, Prince George replied simply, and that I hope the food makes her feel better. With the package prepared, Prince George looked up at Marcus with determination in his young eyes. Can we take this to her, please? Marcus felt torn between protocol and the obvious rightness of the prince's request. Security procedures discouraged any unplanned departures from the palace, and approaching members of the public could create complications. But looking down at the earnest face of the 8-year-old boy, Marcus found himself nodding. We'll need to be very careful, Marcus said, already working out the logistics in his mind, and we'll need to stay together at all times. They left through a side entrance with Marcus maintaining constant radio contact with the security team. The elderly woman had made it only a few blocks before the rain had forced her to take shelter under a shop awning. As they approached, Marcus could see that she was shivering, her thin coat providing little protection against the London weather. Prince George walked up to the woman with the confidence that came from genuine compassion rather than royal privilege. Excuse me, he said politely. I noticed you walking in the rain and I thought you might be hungry. The woman looked up in surprise, her weathered face showing confusion and then recognition as she realized who was standing before her. Your Highness, she stammered, attempting to stand straighter despite her obvious discomfort. Please don't worry about that, Prince George said, extending the package toward her. This is for you. There's some warm food and a blanket. I hope it helps. Marcus watched as tears began to form in the woman's eyes. She accepted the package with trembling hands, clearly overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness. I don't know what to say, she whispered. I came to the palace hoping to tell someone about my grandson. He's serving in Afghanistan and I'm so worried about him. I thought maybe. But I know that was silly of me. Prince George listened intently, his young face serious and compassionate. It's not silly at all, he said firmly. It sounds like you love your grandson very much. What's his name? The woman's face brightened despite her tears. Tommy, she said. Private Tommy Matthews. He's only 19, just a year older than you'll be when you're grown up. I raised him after his parents died, and now he's so far away. Marcus felt his own throat tighten as he watched Prince George process this information. The young prince was quiet for a moment before speaking again. I think Tommy must be very brave to serve his country, he said, and very lucky to have a grandmother who cares about him so much. From his coat pocket, Prince George pulled out a small card and pen. Marcus watched as the boy wrote something down and handed it to the woman. This is my private email address, he said. If you'd like to tell me how Tommy is doing, I would like to hear about him. And if there's ever anything I can do to help, please let me know. The transformation in the woman's demeanor was immediate and profound. Her posture straightened. Her tears turned from despair to gratitude, and a smile broke across her weathered features. Bless you, Your Highness, she said softly. Bless you for seeing me. As they walked back to the palace, Marcus found himself deeply moved by what he had witnessed. The young prince had not only shown compassion, but had also demonstrated wisdom beyond his years. He had understood that the woman's greatest need was not just for food or warmth, but for human connection and acknowledgement of her worth. That was very kind of you, Marcus said as they entered the palace grounds. Prince George shrugged, seeming almost embarrassed by the praise. She was worried about someone she loves, he said simply. Everyone deserves to have someone care about them. Later that evening, as Marcus was preparing to end his shift, he received a call from the woman, Mrs. Matthews. She had used the contact information Prince George had given her to send a message through proper channels, expressing her profound gratitude. The palace staff had verified her story about her grandson, and arrangements had been made to provide her with regular updates on Tommy's unit. But what struck Marcus most was something Mrs. Matthews had said in her message. That young prince didn't just give me food today. He gave me hope. He reminded me that I matter, that my Tommy matters, and that there are still good people in this world who care about others. As Marcus drove home that night, he reflected on the lesson he had learned. Prince George had shown him that true leadership wasn't about authority or protocol. It was about recognizing the humanity in others and acting on that recognition. The young prince had seen past the woman's appearance and circumstances to the heart of her need, and he had responded not as a royal fulfilling an obligation, but as one human being caring for another. That night, Marcus called his own grandmother, whom he hadn't spoken to in months. He listened as she told him about her day, her health concerns, and her worries about the changing neighborhood. For the first time in years, Marcus truly heard her, understanding that his attention and care mattered more than any material thing he could provide. Prince George had taught him something fundamental that day, that every person has value, every story matters, and that sometimes the most profound acts of leadership happen not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of human connection. Marcus realized that he was not just protecting a future king, he was witnessing the development of a truly exceptional human being. A month into his assignment, Marcus found himself facing a personal crisis that would test everything he thought he knew about duty, service, and the meaning of his work. It began on a Monday morning when he received a call from his wife, Sarah, just as he was arriving at the palace for his shift. "Marcus," Sarah's voice was strained with worry. "Emma's teacher called. She's been acting out at school again, and they want to meet with us today. She's been asking why you're never home anymore, why you're always working." Marcus felt his stomach clench with guilt. Since taking the assignment with Prince George, his hours had become longer and more demanding. The increased security protocols meant he often worked 12-hour shifts, and even when he was home, he was frequently tired and distracted. His 8-year-old daughter Emma had begun showing signs of the neglect she felt, acting out in class and becoming withdrawn at home. "I'll try to get away for the meeting," Marcus promised, though he knew how difficult it would be to leave his post. Royal security assignments didn't allow for personal emergencies unless they were truly life-threatening. As Marcus took his position outside Prince George's morning classroom, his mind was divided between his professional duties and his personal crisis. He watched through the doorway as the young prince worked on his mathematics with his private tutor, completely absorbed in solving complex problems that seemed advanced for his age. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Here he was, dedicating his time to protecting someone else's child, while his own daughter struggled with his absence. During a break between lessons, Prince George approached Marcus with the careful consideration that had become familiar over the past month. "Marcus, you seem worried today," the young prince observed. "Is everything all right?" Marcus was struck once again by the boy's perceptiveness. He had tried to maintain his professional demeanor, but Prince George had noticed the subtle signs of his distress. "Just some family matters, Your Royal Highness," Marcus replied, attempting to keep his voice steady. Prince George studied Marcus's face with those serious blue eyes. "Is it about your daughter? Emma, isn't it?" Marcus was surprised that the prince remembered his daughter's name. He had mentioned Emma only once weeks ago in passing conversation. "Yes," he admitted. "She's having some difficulties at school." The young prince was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking. "May I ask what kind of difficulties?" Despite all his training about maintaining professional boundaries, Marcus found himself opening up to the 8-year-old boy. Perhaps it was Prince George's genuine concern, or maybe it was Marcus's own need to share his burden with someone who would listen without judgment. "She's been acting out because I'm working so much," Marcus explained. "She feels like I'm never there for her anymore. Her teacher wants to meet with us today, but I can't leave my post." Prince George nodded thoughtfully, processing this information with the seriousness he applied to everything. "Family is very important," he said quietly. "My father always tells me that taking care of the people we love is one of our most important duties." Before Marcus could respond, Prince George had walked over to where his private secretary was organizing the day's schedule. Marcus watched as the young prince spoke quietly with the woman, his expression earnest and determined. After a few minutes, Prince George returned to Marcus with news that left the experienced guard speechless. "I've asked Miss Collins to contact my parents," Prince George announced. "I've requested that you be given time off today to attend your daughter's meeting." "I told them it was important." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Your Royal Highness, I can't ask you to do that." "It's not appropriate." "You didn't ask," Prince George interrupted gently. "I offered." "There's a difference." Within an hour, Marcus received official word that his request for personal time had been approved. The palace had arranged for additional security coverage, and Marcus was free to attend Emma's school meeting. As he prepared to leave, Prince George stopped him one more time. "Marcus," the young prince said, reaching into his school bag, "could you give this to Emma? I thought she might like it." Prince George handed Marcus a small wrapped package. Inside was a beautiful bookmark made from royal stationery, with a handwritten note that read, "Dear Emma, Your father is a very good man who works hard to take care of people. I hope this bookmark helps you enjoy reading as much as I do. Your friend, George. The school meeting was difficult but productive. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Robertson, explained that the girl had been struggling with attention issues and had been telling classmates that her father didn't care about her anymore because he was too busy with important people to spend time with her. When Marcus showed Emma the bookmark and read her Prince George's note, her eyes widened with amazement. "The real prince wrote this for me?" she whispered, running her fingers over the elegant stationery. "He did," Marcus confirmed. "And Emma, I want you to know that you are the most important person in my world. More important than any job, any palace, any assignment. I'm sorry I haven't been showing you that lately." That evening, Marcus returned to the palace for the final hours of his shift, but something fundamental had changed in his perspective. Prince George greeted him with quiet concern, asking how the meeting had gone and whether Emma was feeling better. The young prince listened intently as Marcus explained that the situation was improving and that Emma had been thrilled by the bookmark. "I'm glad," Prince George said simply. "Children need to know they're loved and important. My parents always make sure I know that, even when they're very busy with royal duties." Over the following weeks, Marcus began to notice how Prince George's own parents balanced their royal responsibilities with family time. Despite their demanding schedules, they prioritized family dinners, bedtime stories, and weekend activities. They had found a way to serve their country while still being present for their children. Inspired by this example, Marcus began making changes in his own life. He requested a schedule adjustment that would allow him to have dinner with Emma at least 3 times a week. He started reading with her every night he was home, and on his days off he gave her his complete attention without any work-related distractions. The transformation in Emma was remarkable. Her behavior at school improved dramatically, and she began excitedly telling her classmates about her father's important job, protecting the prince. She carried the bookmark with her everywhere, treating it like a treasured possession that connected her to something magical. One afternoon, as Marcus was reading in the palace library during his break, Prince George joined him with his own book. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before the young prince spoke. "Marcus, do you think Emma would like to visit the palace sometime? During a public tour, of course. I thought she might enjoy seeing where you work." Marcus looked up from his book, once again amazed by the prince's thoughtfulness. "She would love that, Your Royal Highness. It would mean the world to her." "Good," Prince George said with a small smile, "because families should be proud of each other. Emma should know that her father does important work, and you should know that being her father is the most important work of all." As Marcus reflected on this conversation later, he realized that Prince George had taught him another profound lesson. The young prince had shown him that true service didn't require sacrificing family relationships, but rather finding ways to honor both professional duties and personal responsibilities. The boy had demonstrated that leadership meant caring for the people who served him, understanding their needs and helping them find balance in their lives. That night, as Marcus tucked Emma into bed, she clutched her special bookmark and asked, "Daddy, is Prince George really going to be king someday?" "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus replied. "Someday he will be." Emma was quiet for a moment before saying, "I think he'll be a good king. He cares about people's feelings." Marcus smiled, knowing that his daughter had grasped something essential about the young prince's character. Prince George wasn't just being prepared to rule a country. He was developing the empathy and wisdom that would make him a leader who truly served his people. And in the process, he was teaching everyone around him, including Marcus, what it meant to live with purpose and compassion. The turning point in Marcus's understanding of Prince George came during an unscheduled visit to a London hospital. It was a cold February afternoon when the royal family was meant to attend a routine charity function, but a last-minute change of plans led them to Great Ormond Street Hospital instead. A young patient had written to Prince George, and the boy had insisted on visiting personally rather than simply sending a letter in return. Marcus had coordinated with hospital security to ensure a safe visit, but nothing could have prepared him for what he would witness that day. The patient was a 7-year-old girl named Sophie Chen, who was battling leukemia. Her letter to Prince George had been simple and heartbreaking. She had written that she was scared of her treatments but wanted to be brave like the princes and princesses in her storybooks. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Marcus noticed how Prince George's demeanor shifted. The formal politeness that characterized his public appearances gave way to something more genuine and focused. The young prince had spent time preparing for this visit, reading about Sophie's condition and asking thoughtful questions about how to interact with children facing serious illness. When they reached Sophie's room, Marcus positioned himself outside while Prince George entered with his parents. Through the partially open door, Marcus could observe the interaction that would fundamentally change his understanding of leadership and compassion. Sophie was a tiny figure in the hospital bed, bald from chemotherapy but with bright, curious eyes that lit up when she saw Prince George. Despite her illness, she attempted to sit up straighter, clearly excited by the royal visit. "Hello, Sophie," Prince George said, pulling a chair close to her bed. "I got your letter and I wanted to meet you in person. Is that okay?" Marcus watched as the young prince settled into the chair with complete naturalness, as if visiting sick children was something he did every day. There was no trace of the discomfort that many adults showed in hospital settings, no awkwardness about Sophie's appearance or medical equipment. "You really came to see me?" Sophie whispered, her voice weak but filled with wonder. "Of course," Prince George replied. "Your letter was very brave. You told me you wanted to be courageous like the princes and princesses in stories, but I think you're already much braver than any character in a book." Marcus felt his throat tighten as he watched the interaction unfold. Prince George had brought along a small bag, from which he produced several items. First was a beautiful leather-bound book of fairy tales with a personalized inscription. Second was a small crown made of soft fabric that wouldn't irritate Sophie's sensitive scalp. "This is for you to wear when you're feeling scared," Prince George explained, gently placing the crown on Sophie's head. "It's to remind you that you're already a princess because of how brave you are." But it was what happened next that left Marcus struggling to maintain his professional composure. Sophie, emboldened by Prince George's kindness, began telling him about her fears. She talked about the scary machines, the painful treatments, and how she missed playing with her friends at school. Prince George listened to every word with the focused attention of someone far older than his 8 years. He asked questions that showed genuine interest in Sophie's experiences, validating her fears while also helping her find strength she didn't know she possessed. "Sometimes I pretend I'm a warrior princess fighting dragon cancer," Sophie confided, using the term her parents had taught her to make the disease less frightening. "That's exactly what you are," Prince George said seriously. "And warriors get scared sometimes. That's what makes them brave. They do what they need to do even when they're frightened." Marcus watched as Prince George spent over an hour with Sophie, far longer than protocol typically allowed for such visits. The young prince played simple games with her, looked at her drawings, and listened to stories about her pet rabbit at home. He treated her not as a sick child to be pitied, but as a friend whose company he genuinely enjoyed. When it was time to leave, Sophie asked if Prince George would come back to visit her. Marcus expected the polite but non-committal response that royal training would have dictated, but Prince George surprised him once again. "I'll try my best to visit you again," the prince said. "But even when I can't be here, I want you to remember that you're never alone. Every time you're scared, remember that I'm thinking about you and cheering for you to beat the dragon cancer." As they left the hospital, Marcus could see that Prince George was emotionally affected by the visit. The young prince was quiet during the car ride back to the palace, staring out the window with a thoughtful expression that suggested he was processing everything he had experienced. "Are you all right, Your Royal Highness?" Marcus asked gently. Prince George turned to him with eyes that seemed older than they had that morning. "Marcus, why do bad things happen to good people like Sophie? She's never done anything wrong, but she has to suffer so much." The question struck Marcus as profound coming from an 8-year-old. It was the kind of existential inquiry that philosophers and theologians had grappled with for centuries, yet Prince George was wrestling with it from a place of genuine compassion rather than academic curiosity. "I don't know if anyone has a complete answer to that question," Marcus replied honestly. "But I think what matters is how we respond when we see suffering. What you did today, showing Sophie that she matters, that she's not alone, that makes a real difference." Over the following weeks, Prince George kept his promise to think about Sophie. He asked for regular updates on her condition and sent her small gifts and encouraging notes. When Marcus mentioned that his own daughter Emma had been interested in Sophie's story, Prince George suggested that Emma might like to draw pictures for Sophie to brighten her hospital room. This led to an ongoing correspondence between the two girls, facilitated by Marcus and supervised by the palace staff. Emma, inspired by Prince George's example, began organizing a fundraising effort at her school to support pediatric cancer research. The project gave her a sense of purpose and helped her understand the importance of her father's work in a new way. One evening, as Marcus was ending his shift, Prince George approached him with a question that revealed the depth of his thinking about the hospital visit. "Marcus, do you think being born royal gives me special responsibilities to help people like Sophie?" Marcus considered the question carefully before responding. "I think being born into any position of privilege, whether royal or not, gives us opportunities to help others. What makes you special isn't your title, but what you choose to do with the opportunities you have." Prince George nodded thoughtfully. "I want to use my opportunities well. When I grow up and have more power to help people, I want to remember Sophie and all the children like her." Marcus realized that he was witnessing the formation of a future king's worldview. Prince George wasn't just learning protocol and procedures. He was developing a deep understanding of service that was rooted in genuine compassion for others. The young prince was learning that true leadership meant using whatever power and privilege he possessed to lift up those who were struggling. The visit to Sophie had also taught Marcus something important about his own role. He had always seen himself as a protector, someone whose job was to keep danger away from Prince George. But he was beginning to understand that his real responsibility was to help protect the prince's developing character, to ensure that Prince George continued to grow into someone worthy of the trust that would someday be placed in him. That night, as Marcus reflected on the day's events, he thought about the different types of courage he had witnessed. Sophie's courage in facing her illness, Prince George's courage in opening his heart to someone else's pain, and his own emerging courage to see his work as something more meaningful than just a job. Marcus was beginning to understand that Prince George wasn't just a child who happened to be born into royalty. He was someone who was consciously choosing to use his position to make the world a little bit better, one person at a time. And Marcus was privileged to witness this remarkable young person as he learned to carry the weight of his future responsibilities with grace, wisdom, and genuine love for the people he would someday serve. The moment that would ultimately lead to Marcus's life-changing decision began on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning in late March. The palace was buzzing with preparation for an upcoming state dinner, and security protocols were more stringent than usual. Marcus had been working double shifts for the past week, coordinating with international security teams and ensuring every detail of Prince George's safety was perfectly planned. As Marcus took his position outside the prince's study, he felt the familiar weight of exhaustion settling into his shoulders. The demanding schedule was taking its toll, not just physically but emotionally. Despite the meaningful moments he had shared with Prince George, Marcus was struggling with a growing sense that his life was passing him by while he devoted himself entirely to his work. Prince George emerged from his study carrying a stack of books and papers, his expression more serious than usual. The young prince had been working on a special project for school, a presentation about heroes in everyday life. As they walked toward the library, Prince George seemed lost in thought, occasionally stopping to jot down notes in a small notebook he always carried. "Marcus," Prince George said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence that had developed between them over months of working together. "May I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Your Royal Highness," Marcus replied, though he wondered what could be weighing on the young prince's mind. "Why did you become a security guard? I mean, what made you want to protect people?" The question caught Marcus off guard. In all his years of service, no one had ever asked him about his motivations. He found himself reflecting on his younger self, the idealistic young man who had joined the security services with dreams of making a difference. "I suppose I wanted to do something that mattered," Marcus said slowly. "I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, to help keep good people safe so they could do important work." Prince George nodded thoughtfully, making a note in his little book. "And do you still feel that way? Do you still think your work matters?" The question pierced through Marcus's defenses in a way he hadn't expected. Did he still feel that way? Lately, he had been questioning everything about his career, his choices, and whether the sacrifices he was making were truly worth it. "Sometimes I wonder," Marcus admitted. surprising himself with his honesty. Sometimes I wonder if I'm making any real difference or if I'm just going through the motions. Prince George stopped walking and turned to face Marcus directly. You want to know if your work matters? The young prince asked, his blue eyes intense with conviction. It matters to me. It matters every single day. Before Marcus could respond, Prince George continued with a passion that was remarkable for someone so young. Do you know what you've taught me, Marcus? You've taught me that protecting people isn't just about standing guard or watching for danger. You've taught me that real protection means caring about someone's whole life, their family, their happiness, their dreams. Marcus felt his throat tighten as Prince George's words hit home. Your Royal Highness, please let me finish, Prince George said gently. You remember when you helped me with Mrs. Matthews, the grandmother worried about her grandson? You could have said no. You could have told me it was against protocol. But you didn't. You helped me understand that caring for people means seeing them as complete human beings, not just problems to solve or duties to fulfill. The young prince pulled out his notebook and showed Marcus a page filled with careful handwriting. This is for my school project about everyday heroes. I'm writing about you. Marcus stared at the page, reading words that described him in ways he had never seen himself. Prince George had written about Marcus's kindness, his dedication, and his willingness to put others' needs before his own. But more than that, the prince had written about how Marcus had taught him the true meaning of service through his actions and choices. I don't understand, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm just doing my job. No, Prince George said firmly. You're doing much more than that. You're showing me what it means to be a leader who truly cares about people. Every day I watch how you treat everyone, from my parents to the kitchen staff to visitors like Mrs. Matthews. You treat everyone with the same respect and kindness. As they continued toward the library, Prince George shared more of his observations. He talked about how Marcus had inspired him to pay attention to the people around him, to notice when someone was struggling, and to find ways to help. The young prince had been keeping a journal of all the small acts of kindness he had witnessed Marcus perform, checking on staff members who seemed unwell, helping with tasks that weren't part of his job description, and always treating others with dignity regardless of their position. But I've been failing my own family, Marcus confessed, the weight of his guilt finally finding voice. I've been so focused on this job that I've barely been present for my wife and daughter. Prince George was quiet for a moment before responding. My father once told me that the hardest part of serving others is learning how to serve the people closest to you at the same time. He said it's not about choosing between family and duty, it's about finding ways to honor both. That afternoon, Marcus received news that would bring everything into sharp focus. His wife Sarah called to tell him that Emma had been selected for a special academic program that would require significant family support and involvement. The program was an incredible opportunity for Emma, but it would demand that at least one parent be actively engaged in her education on a daily basis. I know your work is important, Sarah said, her voice filled with both pride and sadness, but Emma needs her father right now. She needs you to be present for this next phase of her life. As Marcus hung up the phone, he felt the weight of an impossible choice settling on his shoulders. His work with Prince George had become more meaningful than any job he had ever held. But his daughter needed him in ways that his current schedule couldn't accommodate. That evening, as Marcus was preparing to end his shift, Prince George approached him with the careful consideration that had become familiar over their months together. Marcus, you seem troubled today. Is there anything I can do to help? For the first time in his professional life, Marcus found himself sharing his personal struggles with someone he was meant to protect. He told Prince George about Emma's opportunity, about the choice he was facing between his career and his family obligations. Prince George listened with the same focused attention he gave to everything important in his life. When Marcus finished speaking, the young prince was quiet for several minutes, clearly thinking through the complexity of the situation. Marcus, Prince George said finally, what would you tell me to do if I were facing the same choice? The question forced Marcus to consider his dilemma from a different perspective. I would tell you to choose your family, he said without hesitation. I would tell you that being a good father is more important than any other role you might play. Prince George smiled, a wise expression that seemed far too mature for his 8-year-old face. Then why is it different for you? The simple question cut through all of Marcus's rationalizations and excuses. He had been telling himself that his work was too important to leave, that Prince George needed him, that he couldn't abandon his responsibilities. But the truth was that he was afraid of giving up the prestige and security of his position, afraid of disappointing his colleagues, and afraid of admitting that his priorities had been wrong. "It's not different," Marcus admitted. "I've just been afraid to admit it." Prince George reached into his bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I have something for you," he said, handing Marcus the gift. "I was going to wait until your birthday, but I think you need it now." Inside the package was a beautiful pen, engraved with Marcus's name and a simple inscription, "For a man who protects what matters most." Accompanying the pen was a letter in Prince George's careful handwriting. The letter thanked Marcus for everything he had taught the young prince about service, kindness, and leadership. But more importantly, it released Marcus from any obligation to continue sacrificing his family for his job. "The best thing you ever taught me," the letter concluded, "was that taking care of the people we love is the most important duty any of us have. Now it's time for you to follow your own advice." As Marcus read the letter, he felt a profound shift in his understanding of his situation. Prince George wasn't just giving him permission to prioritize his family. The young prince was teaching him one final lesson about true leadership. Real leaders, Marcus realized, didn't hold on to people out of their own need for security. They helped others find their own path to meaningful service, even when that path led away from them. That night, Marcus went home and had a long conversation with Sarah and Emma about their future. For the first time in months, he was fully present for his family, listening to their dreams and fears without the distraction of work responsibilities weighing on his mind. As he tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with eyes that reminded him of Prince George's perceptive gaze. "Daddy, are you going to help me with my new school program?" "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus replied, feeling a peace he hadn't experienced in years. "I'm going to be here for whatever you need." That night, Marcus began writing his resignation letter, knowing that the most important lesson Prince George had taught him was about to be put into practice in his own life. The week leading up to Marcus's resignation was filled with a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and profound reflection. He had made his decision, but the process of actually leaving his position with Prince George proved to be more emotionally complex than he had anticipated. After months of meaningful interactions and growing respect for the young prince, Marcus found himself grieving the end of what had become much more than just a professional relationship. On Monday morning, Marcus arrived at the palace knowing that he would need to submit his formal resignation by the end of the week. He had spent the weekend crafting his letter, trying to find words that would express his gratitude while also explaining his reasons for leaving in a way that honored both his professional obligations and his family commitments. Prince George seemed to sense that something significant was happening. The young prince's demeanor was more thoughtful than usual, and he spent much of the morning observing Marcus with the careful attention that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. During their walk to the morning lessons, Prince George broke the contemplative silence that had settled between them. "Marcus, I've been thinking about our conversation last week. Have you made a decision about your daughter's program?" Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Despite Prince George's letter and encouragement, he still felt guilty about leaving his post. "Yes, Your Royal Highness, I have. And what have you decided?" "I've decided to resign from my position," Marcus said quietly. "I need to be present for Emma during this important time in her life." Prince George stopped walking and turned to face Marcus with an expression that was both proud and sad. "I'm happy for you," the young prince said sincerely. "And I'm happy for Emma. She's very lucky to have a father who puts her needs first." The simple acceptance in Prince George's voice nearly brought tears to Marcus's eyes. He had expected the young prince to understand, but the gracious maturity of the response still surprised him. "I want you to know," Marcus said, "that working with you has been the most meaningful experience of my career. You've taught me things about leadership and compassion that I never expected to learn from someone your age." Prince George smiled, but Marcus could see a flicker of sadness in the boy's eyes. "Will I be able to see you sometimes?" "After you leave?" The question revealed the human side of their relationship that had developed beneath the formal protocols. Despite their differences in age and position, a genuine friendship had formed between them. "I would like that very much," Marcus replied. "If it's appropriate and allowed." "I'll make sure it's allowed," Prince George said with the quiet confidence that suggested he understood his own influence better than most people realized. Over the next few days, Marcus worked to transition his responsibilities to his replacement, while also spending quality time with Prince George during what would be their final week together. The young prince seemed determined to make these last days meaningful, engaging Marcus in deeper conversations about life, duty, and the balance between service and personal fulfillment. On Tuesday, Prince George asked Marcus to accompany him to the palace gardens, where they sat on a bench overlooking the carefully manicured grounds. The spring air was crisp, and the early flowers were beginning to bloom, creating a peaceful backdrop for their conversation. "Marcus, I want to tell you something," Prince George said, his voice taking on the serious tone he used when discussing important matters. "You've changed how I think about what it means to be royal." Marcus looked at the young prince with curiosity. "How so?" "Before I met you, I thought being royal meant having people serve you," Prince George explained. "But watching you has taught me that real leadership is about serving others. You've shown me that the most important thing I can do with my position is to help make other people's lives better." The profound wisdom in the young prince's words struck Marcus deeply. Over their months together, he had been focused on learning from Prince George's natural compassion and wisdom. He hadn't realized that his own actions and attitudes had been teaching the future king valuable lessons about leadership. "You've also taught me that it's okay to care about people personally," Prince George continued. "That being professional doesn't mean being cold or distant. You treat everyone with warmth and respect, whether they're royalty or kitchen staff." On Wednesday, Prince George made a request that surprised Marcus. "I'd like to meet Emma before you leave," the young prince said. "I know it's unusual, but she's important to you, which makes her important to me." Marcus was deeply moved by the request. After consulting with the appropriate palace officials, arrangements were made for Emma to visit during a carefully planned meeting in one of the palace's smaller, more intimate reception rooms. When Emma arrived with Sarah, she was clearly nervous but excited. She had dressed in her best clothes and carried the bookmark that Prince George had given her months earlier. Marcus watched with pride as his daughter curtsied politely when introduced to the prince, her eyes wide with wonder at actually meeting the boy who had written her the encouraging note. Prince George put Emma at ease immediately, asking about her school, her interests, and her upcoming academic program. He listened to her responses with the same focused attention he gave to adults, treating her as someone whose thoughts and feelings mattered. When Emma shyly mentioned that she had started a fundraising project for the children's hospital, Prince George's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "That's wonderful, Emma," the prince said. "Sophie would be so proud to know that you're helping other children like her." The meeting lasted only 30 minutes, but it was clear that both children were affected by the encounter. Emma left with a new storybook personally inscribed by Prince George, while the prince seemed pleased to have finally met the daughter who meant so much to Marcus. That evening, as Marcus tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with shining eyes. "Daddy, Prince George is really nice. He talked to me like I was important." "You are important, sweetheart," Marcus said, kissing her forehead. "And so is the work you're doing to help other children." Thursday brought Marcus's final day of official duty, and he could feel the emotional weight of ending this chapter of his life. Prince George seemed unusually quiet during their morning routine, and Marcus sensed that the young prince was also feeling the significance of their approaching separation. During lunch, Prince George asked Marcus to join him in the library for a private conversation. The room was filled with afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows, creating a warm, peaceful atmosphere for what Marcus knew would be their final official discussion. "I have something for you," Prince George said, producing a leather portfolio from his desk. "It's a letter of recommendation, but also something more personal." Marcus opened the portfolio to find an official letter on royal stationery, praising his service and character in terms that would open doors to any security position he might seek in the future. But beneath the formal letter was a handwritten note from Prince George himself. The personal note thanked Marcus not just for his protection, but for his friendship, his guidance, and his example of what it meant to be a good man. Prince George had written about specific moments they had shared, lessons he had learned, and his hopes for Marcus's future happiness with his family. "I also want you to have this," Prince George said, handing Marcus a small framed photograph It showed the two of them during Emma's visit, both smiling naturally as they talked with her about her school projects. "So you'll remember that friendship can exist even between a prince and his guard," Prince George explained. Marcus felt his composure finally break as he looked at the photograph. The image captured something he hadn't fully realized until that moment, that despite all the formal protocols and professional boundaries, he and Prince George had indeed become friends. They had learned from each other, supported each other, and developed a mutual respect that transcended their official roles. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything. For teaching me what real leadership looks like, for caring about my family, and for showing me that it's possible to serve others while still being true to yourself." Prince George stood and extended his hand in a formal gesture, but when Marcus shook it, the young prince pulled him into a brief hug, a spontaneous display of affection that broke all protocols but felt perfectly natural. "Take care of Emma," Prince George said softly. "And remember that the most important thing you'll ever protect is your family's happiness." As Marcus left the palace that afternoon, he carried with him not just the formal recognition of his service, but also the knowledge that he had played a small part in shaping a future king's understanding of leadership, compassion, and service. More importantly, Prince George had taught him that true success wasn't measured by professional achievements or prestigious positions, but by the love and care we show to the people who matter most in our lives. That night, Marcus sat with Sarah and Emma around their dinner table, fully present and engaged in their conversation about Emma's upcoming school program. For the first time in months, he felt complete peace with his choices and excitement about the future he was building with his family. 6 months after leaving his position at the palace, Marcus found himself reflecting on the profound transformation that had occurred in his life. The decision to resign and prioritize his family had led to changes he never could have anticipated, touching not only his own life but rippling outward to affect his community in ways that would have made Prince George proud. Marcus had taken a position as head of security at Emma's school district, a role that allowed him to be present for his daughter's academic journey, while still utilizing his professional skills. The job paid less than his royal appointment, but the personal satisfaction and work-life balance more than compensated for the financial difference. Most importantly, he was home for dinner every night and had become an active participant in Emma's education and extracurricular activities. Emma had flourished in her advanced academic program, but more significantly, she had continued the charitable work that Prince George had inspired. Her fundraising efforts for the Children's Hospital had grown into a school-wide initiative that had raised thousands of pounds for pediatric cancer research. Marcus watched with pride as his daughter demonstrated the same compassion and leadership qualities he had witnessed in Prince George. One evening in late September, Marcus received an unexpected phone call that would bring his story full circle. It was from the palace informing him that Prince George had requested his presence at a special ceremony. The young prince, now 9 years old, was being honored for his charitable work with children's hospitals, and he had specifically asked for Marcus and Emma to attend as his personal guests. The ceremony was held in one of the palace's grand reception halls, filled with dignitaries, medical professionals, and families whose lives had been touched by Prince George's ongoing commitment to helping sick children. Marcus felt a familiar sense of awe as he entered the palace again, but this time he was accompanied by Sarah and Emma, sharing the experience with the people who mattered most to him. When Prince George spotted Marcus in the audience, the young prince's face lit up with genuine joy. Despite the formal nature of the event, Prince George made his way over to greet them personally, showing the same warmth and consideration that Marcus remembered so well. "Marcus," Prince George said, his voice filled with excitement, "I'm so glad you could come. And Emma, look how much you've grown." Emma beamed with pride as Prince George complimented her ongoing charity work, telling her that Sophie Chen, the young cancer patient they had visited, was now in remission and had heard about Emma's fundraising efforts. The connection between the 3 children, Prince George, Emma, and Sophie, represented a chain of compassion that had grown from the smallest acts of kindness into something that was genuinely changing lives. During the ceremony, Marcus listened as speakers praised Prince George's dedication to children's charities. The young prince had continued visiting hospitals regularly, had established a fund for families dealing with pediatric cancer, and had used his platform to raise awareness about the needs of sick children. But what struck Marcus most was how Prince George carried himself during the event, with humility, genuine care for the people he was helping, and a mature understanding of the responsibility that came with his position. When Prince George was called to the podium to accept his award, he delivered a speech that left Marcus marveling at the wisdom and character of this remarkable young person. The prince spoke about the importance of seeing beyond our own circumstances to recognize the needs of others, about the power of small acts of kindness to create large changes, and about the responsibility everyone has to use whatever gifts or privileges they possess to help those who are struggling. "I've learned," Prince George said, his clear voice carrying throughout the hall, "that real leadership isn't about the position you hold or the title you carry. It's about how you treat the people around you, especially those who need help the most. Some of the greatest leaders I know don't wear crowns or live in palaces. They're teachers and security guards, and parents who show up every day to make life better for the people they care about." Marcus felt his throat tighten as he realized that Prince George was speaking, in part, about him. The young prince continued, talking about how the adults in his life had taught him that true service meant putting others' needs before your own, and that the most important thing anyone could do was to show up fully for the people who depended on them. After the ceremony, Prince George made time for a private conversation with Marcus and his family. They sat in a small garden courtyard where Marcus and the prince had once talked about duty and family, and where Prince George had first encouraged Marcus to prioritize his relationship with Emma. "I want to know everything," Prince George said, settling into his chair with the same focused attention Marcus remembered. "How is Emma's school program? How do you like your new job? Are you happy with your decision?" Marcus shared the story of the past 6 months, the challenges of transitioning to a new career, the joy of being present for Emma's achievements, and the satisfaction of finding work that allowed him to serve his community, while also serving his family. Sarah talked about how much happier their home had become, and Emma excitedly described her ongoing charity projects and academic successes. Prince George listened to every detail with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and celebrating their family's happiness with obvious joy. When Emma mentioned that she was considering a career in healthcare so she could help children like Sophie, Prince George's face showed the same pride that an older brother might feel for a younger sibling's aspirations. "Emma, do you remember what I wrote in your bookmark?" Prince George asked. Emma nodded eagerly. "You said my father was a good man who worked hard to take care of people." "That's right," Prince George said. "And now I can see that he's raised a daughter who wants to take care of people too. That's the best kind of legacy anyone can leave." As the afternoon drew to a close, Prince George walked them to their car, seemingly reluctant to end the reunion. Before they left, he handed Emma a small wrapped package. "This is for your charity work," he explained. "It's a donation to your hospital fund, but also something personal." Later, when Emma opened the package at home, she found a check for a substantial amount along with a handwritten note encouraging her to continue her compassionate work. But the gift that meant the most to her was a small pin in the shape of a crown, with an inscription that read, "For Princess Emma, whose kindness makes the world brighter." That evening, as Marcus reflected on the day's events, he realized that his story with Prince George had come full circle in the most beautiful way possible. The young prince who had taught him about the importance of family and authentic service had grown into someone who was using his position to make a real difference in the world. Meanwhile, Marcus had found his own way to serve others while honoring his commitment to his family. But perhaps most importantly, Emma had been inspired by both Prince George and her father to understand that true leadership wasn't about titles or positions. It was about using whatever abilities and opportunities you had to help others and make the world a little bit better. 6 months later, Marcus received one final letter from Prince George. The young prince, now approaching his 10th birthday, had written to tell Marcus that Sophie Chen was completely cancer-free and had started her own charity work in her local community. The letter also mentioned that Mrs. Matthews, the grandmother they had helped months earlier, had received word that her grandson Tommy was safe and would be returning home soon. "I wanted you to know," Prince George had written, "that the kindness you showed me and taught me to show others is still spreading. Every person we helped has gone on to help someone else. That's how I know that your work mattered. and that the choice you made to put your family first was the right one. True service isn't about sacrificing the people we love. It's about learning from them, and with them how to love others better. Marcus carefully placed the letter in a special folder with all the other correspondence from Prince George. Someday when Emma was older, he would share these letters with her so she could understand the full story of how a young prince's wisdom had changed their family's life. As Marcus turned off the light and headed upstairs to check on Emma, who was undoubtedly reading under her covers with a flashlight, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought him to this point. Prince George had taught him that the greatest honor wasn't in serving someone important, but in becoming someone worthy of the trust placed in him by the people he loved most. The guard had resigned, but the man had finally learned how to truly serve.